I talk?
Yes.
What do I say?
You're supposed to ask me my background.
Yeah, please explain.
Could you explain your background? And
Well, I guess I have a few different things in my background that might be relevant to why you're asking me. One is I'm a former Navy surface warfare officer, which means I was a ship's officer. I was on guided missile destroyers. My entire job, in reality, was to prevent ships from being sunk by airplanes. That's what guided missile destroyers do. We shoot airplanes down before they can sink us. And so I think that Billy Mitchell's mission was completely relevant to what it was that I did in the Navy. I'm also, I was a history major in college, and I've studied history all my life. So I'm fascinated by people like General Mitchell. The world doesn't see them very often. When they do come, they typically don't make friends, but they typically point the way that we are going to go, for better or worse, for whatever cause. And he was one of those people that came along in history and did that.
And what do you currently do?
Currently, I'm an attorney for the Naval Air Systems Command, and I basically buy all the aircraft that the Navy flies and the Marine Corps flies.
So how many years have you been working with naval aviation?
Naval aviation for 21 years, and with the Navy, a total of about 33.
do the opinion question now. In your opinion, as a military officer, do you think Mitchell was right in going to the press and expressing his opinions about military air power of the time?
That is an absolutely wonderful question, because you can answer that question and be absolutely right and completely disagree with yourself at the same time. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. As a military officer was how you prefaced the question. That was the prepositional phrase that I heard. So as a military officer, Billy Mitchell was in violation of his orders. He was essentially told by his superior commissioned officers that they don't want to see him in the newspaper any longer. His job is to serve the United States government and the officers lawfully appointed over him, and they have told him to get out of the newspaper. And he didn't. That act of going back to the public press when he is essentially an officer in the Army, when directed by the Army not to go back to the press, was in violation of his orders. So that's the first way you can answer it. As a commissioned officer, he made himself liable for courts martial, and he received it, and he was broken down from brigadier general to colonel and retired. That was what he got for that. The other way you can look at the question is from I don't want to use the word humanitarian because it's got more than one meaning. So from a civilization perspective, Billy Mitchell was doing something that somebody had to do. Warfare is science. It really is. It's not what people think it is. It's the application of physics to things or to methods to stop other people from doing something. That's really what it is. Now, we can stop you by scaring you. We can stop you by making you think twice before you do something. But what we're guaranteeing you is that if you do something that we don't want you to do, you can get killed. And the evolution of warfare from the beginning is people learning to master the world that they live in. They're learning to master the science that they're aware of, to improve their ability to inflict their will on other people. That's really all that warfare sounds. Now, that you might not like that, but that's what it is. So what do I mean by that? If I discover something scientifically that I now see relevance to a military purpose for that science, and I use that, and I have it and you don't, I have an advantage over you. Russia has nuclear power. The United States has nuclear power. Israel has nuclear power. North Korea has nuclear power. And a lot of people don't. And some people, like the Iranians, want it. And some people, like the Americans, don't want them to have it. What's that about? I do not want you to have power over me. I do not want you to be able to hold me hostage because you have power over me that I can't check. That's what military power has always been. It's checks and balances between countries, between peoples, between governments, to make sure you don't go too far. And what Billy Mitchell was looking at was this, from a physics point, is science. It exists. It can be done. I will show you how. And when I show you how, I'm helping you. I'm showing you you're my country, that this is what somebody else can do to your ships. This is what somebody else can do to us. So we better get good at doing this ourselves, because they're going to do it to us. That's the way the military is since people first decided that they were going to fight. You always look for the advantage. The advantages are the guy in the high ground has the advantage over the guy in the low ground. This man's in an airplane. It's harder to fight up than it is to fight down. That's called gravity. There are physical principles behind what we're talking about, and they've always been true. It's why people in castles shoot down from towers, and people on the ground die. It's just the way the military warfare art is. And Billy Mitchell realized that planes were now, we had engines strong enough to lift bombs heavy enough to sink ships. That's what he figured out. I guess he's more like, in my mind, Galileo was. So during the Renaissance, Galileo has a telescope, and he can see certain things about the movement of stars and planets that utterly convinces him that the world is round and that things aren't revolving around the Earth, they're revolving around the sun. The other planets are. And he starts to figure this out on his own, and he tells the people who were the scientific authorities at the time, which happened to have been the Catholic Church, they don't disagree with him. They say to him, we've seen your studies, we've got other studies, we think you probably are right, but your problem, Galileo, is you said that this is how things are. We don't say anything is, because only God knows what is. We say it's more likely than not that things are like this. But Galileo had done so many experiments. He went back and did more. And he had did so many experiments. He knew that the world was round. He knew that we were revolving around the sun and the sun wasn't revolving around the earth. And so he wrote another paper and he said, no, I'm not going to shut up. I'm going to tell you what I know. It is true. And then he got censored. He got censored not because of what he believed, but because he said, this is how it is. So it's kind of a similar experience. Billy Mitchell says, I can do this. They say, well, you have to do it according to our methods. He does it the way he knows it's going to work. They say, you cheated, we're not counting it. He says, there is no cheating, it's called war. Nobody cheats in war. I won. That's how it works. And somebody else is going to do it to you too. They said, that's enough of that, be quiet. He says, I can't be quiet because other people will know about this. And to one degree, he was right. Maybe the government didn't like him going out in the newspapers and saying this, but we know for a fact that all the other powers in the world knew that he had done this. They're not waiting for the newspaper. They send observers. They have people here in their embassies who write back about things that they hear about. That's the nature of the world. So he wasn't really revealing a secret. It's just that he refused to get off of the idea that this is how things were going to be. But he was absolutely right. Ever since the advent of air power, the world has learned, page by page, literally, that yes, air power can trump everything else. It's not going to win your wars on the ground fighting house to house, but it's going to change dramatically, very, very quickly, where you're fighting, what you're fighting over, what land you have, what shelter you have. You have no protection from the air. That's the thing. If you're in a fixed location, you're a target. And you'll see after Billy Mitchell, very rapidly, air power starts to change very quickly. Countries in the 1920s start building bigger bombers, start working on their engine technology to build airplanes that can carry heavier loads, that can fly longer ranges, that can fly higher altitudes, and so they can fly above the range of your weapons to shoot them down. And the world changes very dramatically. What I would say, though, on behalf of the people who were in charge at the time, who court-martialed Billy Mitchell, everything changed in that generation in a way that is so hard for anyone to understand today. For instance, as I had said earlier, in the 1880s we were still sailing wooden ships. In the 1890s we started building them out of steel, we started armor plating them. Something changed. Our ability to work with metal changed. Our ability to mold and cast metal changed. Our ability to build more powerful engines changed. Ships went from weighing, 300 tons to weighing 50,000 tons. Those aren't small changes. A freak accident occurred in Germany in the 1870s, I believe it was, where they were making synthetic fertilizer because the British had the market locked down for fertilizer, which was all natural organic fertilizer, and they wouldn't sell to the Germans at a reasonable price because the Germans were their economic competitors. So the Germans said, well, we can't afford to buy what they want to charge us, let's go invent our own. So they put a bunch of chemists in a laboratory and they came up and they figured out what organic fertilizer was made out of, and they started making it out of chemicals. And it all worked really well until one day that one of their chemical fertilizer factories, and the fertilizer is ammonia nitrate, the ammonia nitrate factory blew up and there was nothing left. It disintegrated. It was demolecularized. And people said, what just happened? And a little freak accident with fertilizer resulted in the discovery of high explosives. That's the 1870s. By 1914, when World War I starts, every country has massive cannons firing high explosives at each other. In other words, chemistry is advancing at a rapid pace. Metallurgy is advancing at a rapid pace. People went from walking to war to riding to war. When Germany invades France in 1914, it's the railroad that brings them to the front. Yes, they're still marching with mules, but I guarantee you that within 20 years at the end of World War I, that's no longer happening. So the whole world is advancing so quickly for this generation of people. And some people will always be in charge of the world. Some people will always be responsible for protecting everybody else. That's what the Army General Staff does, the Navy's Admiralty does. Those people in that particular generation are responsible for mastering all of the science of the world. In reality, they have to understand what these changes in metallurgy mean. They have to understand what these changes in chemistry mean. They have to understand what this new aviation thing is really all about and how much can it really do. At the same time that air power is growing, battleships are getting bigger, battleships are getting stronger. At the same time as all of that's happening, I mean, you now live in the world of machine guns and concrete and helmets and all kinds of modern things that never existed before are suddenly there. Every one of them is new. Every one of them brings new capabilities. People couldn't necessarily figure out what the next war was going to look like. If Billy Mitchell has anything to his credit at all, Billy Mitchell maybe single-handedly in 1921 saw what the next war was going to look like, and he wanted everybody else to see it too. Whether or not they wanted to see it is a different issue. But he was right. And for that matter, Billy Mitchell is known and revered as the father of the United States Air Force. To this day, the United States Air Force celebrates the day that Billy Mitchell sank the Ostfriesland.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything further?
I think that's it.
So would you concur that the stand he took was correct at the time and was important to American history?
I can answer that directly if you want me to, or you want me to wait for her.